Elaine Dinos and her family first found Serenbe back in 2011 when they started coming down for events and weekend trips while living in Atlanta. However, it wasn't until the pandemic hit that things really shifted. And what started out as another brief getaway turned into a life-changing, transformative experience. Within a few days, Elaine and her husband Shep enrolled their kids in school and made an offer on a house. And even though they kept second-guessing themselves, their hearts knew this was the place they needed to be. In this episode of Serenbe Stories, Elaine shares how Serenbe's unique sense of community, connection to nature, and an intentional way of living drew her in, and how it continues to shape her work as the founder of Kindred Lane, a purpose-driven leadership and impact company.
Yeah, and I think that's why the community is so special, right? They didn't just end up here,
no.
Right? Like the highway doesn't take you right here. You have to intentionally choose to listen to your heart to come here.
That's right.
All right, so we are recording. So, Elaine, we are so excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
Welcome to Serenbe Stories.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the conversation. It's always fun. We see people on the streets, but then when we sit down for these chats, we always learn a little something new.
Yes, well, I'm honored to be here and love chatting with you guys anytime.
Yeah. So we always ask everybody at the beginning of Serenbe Stories, what is your Serenbe story? How did you come to Serenbe? How did you find out about it?
So my first time to Serenbe was actually 2011, back when the Afternoon in the Country events were happening.
Yes.
So we drove down here, met a friend down here, and had no idea what we were coming to find. And it was like the best kept secret on the outskirts of Atlanta. And then we started coming back just for plays or for weekends. We were living in Atlanta in this tiny house. And then when we had our first child, it was like too small for my parents to come stay comfortably. So we, instead of renting a hotel in Atlanta, we would come down here.
Oh.
And we would just explore, or, with the kids, we now have 3 kids. We would just come down over the years. And then it was 2018, I hosted a workshop as part of a women's retreat. And then I ended up hosting, or maybe it was a year or two before that. And then in 2018, I ended up hosting a retreat, co-hosting the first women's purpose retreat that has continued to come back with the co-founder. She's continued to run that. But that was when I really started coming down here more often and bringing friends down here, hosting work events. And then when the pandemic hit, we had some friends that almost moved here or spent the early days of the pandemic down here. We had other friends that moved here. And I started to wonder, like, oh, wait, maybe it's not just weird people living out there in the village. Like, I'd always come down and wondered, okay, this is a great, incredible, intriguing place. I loved going on walks around and going to the inn and the plays. But I'd always wondered who these people were. Like, are they actors? Are they real people? Is this all real? And we ended up knowing some of those people, so we started exploring it. A whole another story of life in the pandemic with 3 young kids at home and as an entrepreneur. And so some of those pain points that we were feeling at home in the pandemic, we ended up coming down here for like a 2-night stay and renting a place. And I kind of knew what was going to happen. I don't think my husband had any idea what was going to happen. But I'd looked into the school, and we knew, friends that were here. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves enrolling the kids in school, putting an offer on a house over the course of like 2 days. He was not expecting that. So that was a bit of a surprise. This was fall of 2020.
Okay, I was going to ask, 'cause I feel like you've been here longer than that.
That's what I was going to say.
I know.
My goodness,
I just feel like you've like a huge fabric of the community now.
Oh, you're
and
sweet.
It's only 4 years this last fall then? Would that be correct?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of us in our family. I think we're all out and about quite a bit. So yeah, 4 years.
Okay.
So I would say pandemic, school, things not working fully in our, we didn't have a sense of community as much as we were looking for, and kind of the pandemic revealed that.
What part of Atlanta were you guys in?
We were in Buckhead.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And we had so many great friends there, but when the pandemic hit, you kind of just felt very isolated. And between schools and work and just a lot of things pulling us in different directions. And so we came down, and it was really, when we were here looking, it just felt like such a decision of the heart. And then we would get in the car and start driving back to Atlanta, and we're like, what were we thinking? This is crazy. We couldn't do this drive. You know, like my husband's driving up to Atlanta most days. We're like, wait, we're going to pull our kids out of school here and then drive past like every school in Atlanta to go be in the school in Chattahoochee Hills. Like, this doesn't make sense. So as soon as we get in the car, it became like all the rational ideas we would talk ourselves out of. And then we would come back down and be like, oh, but it's so wonderful here. We love it. Like, we should trust our hearts. And then we'd get back in the car and be like, no, that was crazy. Like, you know, we're going to really just sell our acre lot and buy a 16th of an acre here for the same price, you know, just, and then we ended up listening to our heart more and coming down and meeting all those people that we were not sure were real. And we realized that they're wonderful. There were incredible people here, and the community was actually the best part, and the trails. We didn't know about the trails or the community until we moved here.
We didn't either, really, when we moved. We moved early days, 2009, but we had no idea about the community. We just sort of fell in love with the connection to nature and the beauty of the place that Steve built, but no clue. Like, there was a lake. We're in Grange, and there was a lake by us. We had no idea there was even a lake there.
Right.
And you have articulated the very struggle that most people go through.
Yeah.
And it also, people are amazed after they're here. You know, people seem so friendly. They're waving. But if you have a community where everyone has made their decision from their heart, it's a very different community. And that's, you articulated it perfectly, is there's no real rational reason that this works.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why the community is so special, right? People they didn't just end up here.
No.
Right? Like, the highway doesn't take you right here. You have to intentionally choose to listen to your heart to come here.
That's right. That's right. It's a very different place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then amazing. I was just counting. Who would have ever guessed? We now have 5 coffee shops and 3 hairdressers.
Isn't that crazy?
That's really impressive.
I know.
Yeah.
Right here in the middle of the woods. That
Yeah.
makes no logical sense either, right? When everybody thinks.
I love that.
Yeah, where you put the daisy in the middle of the woods and people thought you were nuts.
Oh, everyone
as well as your
was
townhouse.
sure I was nuts. If I was really doing all this, why not put it on the road?
Right.
And
the right people find it.
But that's this is about placemaking. It's not about housing or shelter or development.
But I feel like it's interesting because the metaphors for my work all come to life here. So I end up, when I'm hosting events here for work, I feel like I'm just ending up being a Serenbe tour guide. But I often say it's like, you know, getting off the highway, getting off, you know, like creating your own trail or getting off the beaten path and choosing to go on a journey. So the metaphors of what brings us to Serenbe are all in sync with so much of the metaphors I use for work, although they're real here too. You can literally get off the beaten path and go find the trail in the woods, and you never know who you're going to run into, which is one of the best parts too.
Well, and speaking of your company, so Kindred Lane is your company. You're the CEO and founder. Tell us a little bit about it. And I'm actually kind of curious where you came up with the name as well, because as we're talking about roads, you've got lane in there.
Yes.
So talk to me.
Exactly. Yes. So Kindred Lane is... well, let's see. On March 8th, it will be 7 years old.
Congratulations.
My youngest child. I often describe it as the garden that's growing in the space around my kids, because when I started Kindred Lane, I had like a 4, 2, and 1-year-old. And so there was not a lot of space, but it was really a longing of what wasn't present for me on my leadership journey and in the work that I was doing, and looking for some deeper meaning and really the journey that we go on as individuals, but also as leaders. So Kindred Lane itself is a leadership and impact company, leadership development, social impact, environmental impact, but really we operate through coaching, retreats, and leadership and impact programs. And then we do some custom consulting too. So essentially we work with clients who are either individual leaders or leadership teams who are wanting to cultivate more well-being or purpose or impact. There's something they're longing for. And so we bring a lot of research from work I'd done previously and a lot of research that's out there around culture and team building and connecting from shared values and purpose, right? From the corporate side. And then we also bring a lot of deeper spiritual experiences and personal growth and nature. And that is a lot of the foundation for supporting people on their journeys from kind of the status quo of where they are into really a journey of finding more abundance in their life in whatever way that looks, life and leadership. So the name Kindred Lane is really about the kindred spirits that we meet on our path and our journey of purpose and self-discovery immersed in nature. So there are really three elements of our methodology. It's about reconnecting with self, one another, and nature. And so when I come to Serenbe, it's like, oh, we're doing that here, right? So a lot of times people in Serenbe are like, what exactly do you do? I'm like, well, it's a lot of what it looks, like on the surface, it looks like what we're doing here. But when I'm working with leaders and corporate teams and people who are, operating in a different way of being, getting them out of those structures and silos and like just trying to make quarterly earnings and, keep up with the busy go kind of rat race of the corporate world. When you're in that mindset and that mentality, you're having a very different experience of how you create, right? You're producing, there's a lot of like extracting, like squeezing all the fruit out of something or the juice out of the fruit, as opposed to regenerative growth of, what really feeds you and nourishes you and energizes you. So yeah, I can go on, but I'll stop there for now.
Well, I'm super curious, because that's something that Serenbe sets its mission is, connect people to nature and each other. But you've had this company 7 years. So was that always a part of it, or is that something that sort of blossomed, or was Serenbe a little bit of a mirror to the business that you're like, I've been doing it, but I didn't know how to articulate it? Tell me a little bit about that, because I think it's growing that connection, that people understand that connection to nature. And I think COVID accelerated that interest. But tell me where you sort of entered that.
So before starting Kindred Lane in 2018, I spent most of my career in the corporate world, which is why that's typically the audience that I work with. So I was a partner at Korn Ferry, executive search, leadership consulting, wonderful company for a lot of reasons in supporting people and growth in their career development and organizational development. I had started the purpose practice there back, I have to think about how old my kids were. Was it 2015, 2016? I had kind of been on a path of working with a lot of more traditional companies, American Express and Avon and Intercontinental Hotel Group and, a ton of different companies. So I worked across the consumer sector and marketing center of expertise. And so I worked with a lot of traditional companies, traditional leaders working in those companies. And I started to notice trends of what was happening with those organizations and leaders. And then I started to fall into working with more purpose-driven companies like Kind Healthy Snacks and Tom's Shoes, and some nonprofits like Charity Water. And so I just started to notice, I spent 12 years there, I started to notice what happened to me when I was working with these companies that were more purpose-driven. And I started to notice what was happening inside these companies. And when I was recruiting for these companies, like finding the C-suite leaders, the chief marketing officer of a company that had a strong purpose and culture around purpose, I was calling a lot of people from different companies and starting to hear the stories of what was happening when, a company, a brand was acquired by a larger multinational company. I won't get specific because this is not an expose piece about, brands getting acquired by larger companies.
These are things that happen.
This was things that would happen. So I ended up writing doing a research study when I was pregnant with my third child. It was like this 9-month research study while I was pregnant with my third child. But we interviewed founders and CEOs and leaders of like 30 purpose-driven companies. I worked with Interface too during that time. And so we interviewed these leaders and started to hear the stories. And then we did a lot of quantitative research around how purpose was impacting performance inside a larger set of companies. And we essentially proved that purpose drives performance over like a compound annual growth rate 4 times that of the S&P over a 5-year period. There's all this research around it and how it drove engagement and innovation and just incredible factors around what happens when you're clear about your purpose and the people really feel that. So that was kind of the backdrop for me professionally. And then personally, I had 1, 2, and then 3 children in 4 years. And that did something to my career and my work-life balance.
Amazing.
It required me to look at things that I had not looked at about how I was taking care of myself and prioritizing well-being and all these things. So without getting into all of the details, I will say there was an opportunity for transformation and having to take a look at how I was just giving everything of myself to my work, and there was nothing left for myself or for my children that became increasingly requiring more of me. And so that really shifted things. And then a much longer story I can get into more if you want, but it was the last week of January in 2016 when I gathered a group of peer leaders from across our company, because I would come back from each maternity leave, like more committed to the purpose practice and to the work we were doing and having a positive impact and also my own soul searching journey, right? And so I gathered this group of leaders. We did some exercises around values and soul searching. And I was also started working with an executive coach because I was really struggling with having young kids at home and trying to be you need to be in New York on Thursday with the CEO, and then trying to manage that and drop everything. It just was not conducive to balance and well-being. So all these things started to happen at once. The working with the executive coach, the gathering the leadership team, or it became the beginning of the purpose, the core purpose team. That then grew into the purpose practice and the purpose community of like 200 people over the course of the next year. But we gathered this group and people were doing interesting things related to sustainability or personal purpose or impact, just in very disparate parts of the company. And we gathered together and that started to set something in motion for me. And internally, I was realizing, I haven't really been taking care of myself. I'm going to go back and do these meditations. So while I was on this trip, and now I'm realizing I'm getting into the longer version of the story. So I'm just going with it. You guys cut me off if it's
not at all. Not at all. This is interesting.
So, I realized, I haven't been going back to my yoga practice and my meditation that I had been more regularly practicing before children kind of thrown off the balance of my schedule and priorities, in a good way too. But I ended up going back to this meditation, and I remember being in the hotel room of this Minneapolis hotel where we were meeting for this meeting, and going through this meditation and connecting to my root chakra and realizing that my root chakra has been really longing for my attention. I haven't really reconnected to, I was kind of going through my different chakras, and I had this my root chakra just kept talking to me root chakra, it was like a whoop, whoop. And so I just noted that in my meditation, I need to spend more time focused on my root chakra. I go to the meeting, we're having these conversations, and I just noticed people start making reference to unearthing something or getting to the root of something, digging deeper. And I mentioned it in the meeting. I'm like, do you guys hear these metaphors? We're all talking about unearthing, digging to the root. And people were like, oh, yeah, okay. And so I just kind of filed that away. And I realized I'm you know what? I'm going home. I'm going to start my I'm going to recommit to my yoga practice. And you know what? I'm going to go do that juice cleanse that I've been talking about doing. And I went home and went to go to a yoga class, and I look next door and it says Roots Juices. And I'm like, oh, okay, I think I'm supposed to go in there. Like this thing about roots is really talking to me. So I go into the juice place. I get the 3-day juice cleanse. It's my first juice cleanse. And I went to the yoga class. And by the 3rd day of this, I was like, it felt like I was high. And it felt like I was high for like 2 weeks. For like, everything just felt high vibing. I think I was so depleted. I needed to do the juice cleanse. Who knows? It was just vegetables and fruits in the juice. Mm-hmm. But I started to have a lot of, I call it now my forest awakening, because I had all of these realizations about how we are all like trees. And that I was really disconnected from my roots. And my roots were about my values and how much we are interconnected in our roots with one another, and how we're all like trees, essentially, that we need to nourish and energize and restore. We need the sun and the water and the soil. And when we do that, then we can actually thrive and take care of ourselves. And I realized that I had been kind of like frantically jumping from one branch of my tree to the other of motherhood and work, and that I was like, felt like a tree that was splitting because it hadn't been watered in so long. And so it was a really profound experience. And I'm just going to, I tell this story a lot, and sometimes people think it's completely crazy, and that's okay, because, like,
it's your story.
Maybe it's my story. And maybe when you get so depleted, you decide to do something about it. And, maybe someone will be in that. Maybe someone will be in that place, and then they'll realize, this isn't that weird. That's someone else has gone through that.
Everybody comes at it from a different angle, very much so.
So this is a much longer version of the story than I was planning on telling, but essentially through that experience, I started drafting everything that became Kindred Lane, and a lot of the exercises that we share now came from that initial seed that became our methodology that's called the wisdom of the forest. And it became about reconnecting with self, one another, and nature. And I started to notice that essentially, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, we all go through journeys, and we can choose to get off the beaten path, off the highway, and chart our own path. And once we do that, we start to find a lot of those answers that we're seeking. And so our whole methodology around reconnecting with self, one another, and nature kind of started with that. And then that seed grew into a lot of other things. I was still at Korn Ferry that time, and so I started talking about trees to everyone. They're like, what in the world? Elaine has lost her mind. But then that became the foundation for the work at Kindred Lane. And then Korn Ferry became my first client.
Ah, wonderful.
When I started Kindred Lane, and then a lot of collaborations since, and a lot of the people that I kind of worked with and the community there as they have kind of gone on their journeys and, looking for something beyond the playbook that gets us to where we are, right? Like we have a playbook for success and making money and, check all the boxes and do well in school and all the condition, like here's what I'm supposed to do. And then at some point that stops working, or people realize they're not happy with it, or it's not really getting us to where we want to go, or it's not really creating a world that looks like what we want it to look like. And so that tends to be when people reach out and want to, talk.
Yeah, no, I think we need more, you use the word regenerative leadership. I had a conversation with a woman for other podcast, Biophilic Solutions, and we talked about how really we as individuals are really attuned to the cycles of nature, but capitalism and corporate America is all very linear and ladder climbing, and it's always pushing you to do more and more and more and never stop. Like you have to have this consistency, and it creates burnout. And we really need to be cycling through. And we were discussing specifically wintering.
Yes.
And I think that's, goes to a forest metaphor that,
Yeah.
We're noticing the daffodils coming out. It's the end of February here and the trees starting to blossom. And that change is really beautiful and we look forward to it, but we don't appreciate wintering as much and sort of that retreat and hibernation and to reconnect and have awareness with yourself and take time because we're told we can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. The pause, the take a breath, the rest. Yeah. It's like, I feel like the old me would say, like, when you walk by someone, like, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm busy. Just keep running. I'm busy. Like, what is that? That's not a, how are you? That's a, like, I'm not open to talking and let me just keep doing.
Reporting, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the wintering and the seasons, I'm actually co-leading a session at the Biophilic Leadership Summit.
Oh, you probably are doing with Rebecca who I just interviewed this afternoon. It was amazing.
I say Rebecca and I are good friends, and we are doing that together.
Her program is Sister Season. So we'll put all those links in the show notes. That's so interesting. Yeah. So it was. We discussed, I think, permission. That sometimes we don't get permission or give ourselves permission. Not that I should be seeking it, but we don't think that we can take a break.
Right.
And that, leads to not great outcomes.
Yeah. We have a very messed up attitude of what success is.
Absolutely. Well, and success, like, how does that really align with happiness?
Well, happiness just doesn't equate.
No.
That's the problem. That's why we're more depressed and sick, and it isn't working because that's never, our personal success is never part of what we supposedly are supposed to be striving for.
Right.
Well, and the concept of balance, which I know we've talked about a lot, life in balance rather than you're healthy or you're sick or you're happy or you're sad, but it's balance because you can't maintain either one forever. And like, the world tells you have to, and that just doesn't.
And you can't winter all year long.
No.
You have to have that balance.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how the circles sort of come together. And I know you work with Children of Nature Network. Was that before moving here, or did that all happen since coming here?
Yeah. So sometimes I feel like I'm wearing the community hat, wanting to connect and just shine light on great things people are doing. And sometimes I'm wearing my Kindred Lane hat. And I'm also wearing my mom hat, like all the different hats.
Yep.
So Children Nature Network has just been an opportunity to collaborate. I mean, there's so many great neighbors here. I would say one of my favorite things is just allowing myself to get Serenbe'd and see who I run into and what collaborations come out of it. I have had
because that's so parallels what you're doing. That's why I was curious.
Yes.
A lot of your terminology is coming from.
Yeah. So it's funny because so much of the terminology of just kindred spirits, going on your journey and seeing what kindred spirits come in to guide your path forward. Like, that's just a day in the life here, right? Mm-hmm. So it's funny, you were asking, like, did Serenbe shape the language? A lot of the language of Kindred Lane was already there, and the metaphor, and we kept collaborating because of the metaphors we use in leadership. We collaborated with, the folks at Biomimicry Institute, or had put on an event with Paul Hawken years ago, had done all of these where people who are in the regenerative nature space had wanted to collaborate. So we kept getting closer and closer to the impact. And now we've brought in programs that actually help leaders have a restorative impact. So Children Nature Network is one. We're now doing a project with Atlanta Downtown Improvement District where we're bringing native plants. We've started the Downtown Native Plant and Wellness Initiative. So we're helping them gather community to then have a more positive impact. So we work with a lot of different impact partners. We've worked with, collaborated with Rodale, and, there's so many different individuals and organizations that are having substantial, positive, restorative, regenerative impact. And so we'll partner with them as impact partners and then bring in leaders around, a common theme.
Mm-hmm.
So they're one of the great kindred spirits and collaborators that we've gotten to know here in Serenbe.
Yeah.
Well, and I know Richard Louv, who started the foundation, Children in Nature Network, his book, when you and Marie read that, you felt that he was reflecting back everything that you felt, but he was able to articulate it. And I always think that's interesting when you have like minds come together, that, the universe is telling you something, not to get, again, a little bit woo-woo, and so they all kind of come together sometimes, and it's sort of like, we don't know where it started and ended, but
that's exactly. I mean, when we left Atlanta, now this is in the 90s. Everyone thought we were crazy and couldn't understand it. And you couldn't really explain it to them. Post-pandemic, it's easier to explain and people can relate what you're talking about. But then when Richard Louv's book came out, I sent him a note and I said, "Oh, thank you. You have articulated. Now I can just give people the book when they think I'm crazy."
Right. Well, and I would say so much of what I was trying to do with Kindred Lane and explain when we came here, I'm like, oh, yeah, this is happening, right? Like, we're living it every day.
It's manifesting in a different way, in a place rather than a consultancy.
And it's amazing how good corporate leadership also relates to good parenting, or vice versa. You can use a lot of the same principles.
I would say I almost started a program called Mothership Development because motherhood has taught me so much about leadership and the surrender to motherhood. So yes, I could not agree more.
When our children were small, someone gave us the book "Children: The Challenge," and it was written, I think, in the 50s. I mean, it's old, and I found it a great management tool because it's about respect and lots of things that it's true in the corporate world, and so you could just change the terminology.
Sure. I actually, my children have helped as strategic advisors and innovators. There's a little game we play that I share with leaders at Kindred Lane that the children helped me develop, because if it works with 3 children at the dinner table, it will work with a group of any leader in the boardroom. But it's called Listening from the Heart, and we pass a heart stone, and you share and speak from the heart, and you can't argue because the only person who can talk is holding the heart, and the whole object of the game is to listen. And so if it works with 3 boys at the dinner table, and so it was ready for the boardroom, and people love it. It's so simple. Some people think it's a little cheesy, but they end up loving it even more. They're like, give them, just give me that heart.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll see me placing hearts around or just sharing hearts with people.
Good.
So.
Okay, good. Well, one of the things we always want to know is, like, what's the day in a life? So you've got the 3 kids that they're going to school. You've got your work. Are you out and about? Like, what's a perfect day for you in Serenbe?
A perfect day?
Well, what's your regular day? And then I want to know what you want to recommend to somebody else to have a perfect day.
So I am, like I said, my work is a garden that's growing in the space around the kids. A perfect day is taking the kids to school, having some time for myself to go for a walk and get Serenbe'd, go through the trails and have coffee at one of our amazing coffee shops.
One of the 5.
And see who I run into and what comes from that. And the best is when I'm commuting on the golf cart to the inn to host workshops for people. That's like a perfect day. I'm like driving by the lake, like, this is my commute.
I know. I know, the ducks give you traffic.
So that's a particularly perfect day when I'll have like an afternoon workshop for a group here. Foraging, I love to forage. So going through the woods and just foraging.
Is there anything coming out right now? It's sort of the end of February, early
lion's
March.
mane.
Okay.
So I've found one lion's mane in the woods each year, but I haven't yet. And I know as soon as I just let go of the expectation, it will arrive, but it's hard when I'm like trying to.
Looking so hard.
Yes. Yes. So it's a humbling process, but I am not advocating to go pick mushrooms and eat them in the woods unless you really know what you're doing.
Unless you have Chef Nick with you.
Yes. There are a handful of mushrooms that I know, and then, other native plants that, like the blackberries that grow around. And, a particularly great day is when the blueberries start blooming in June. And dropping kids at summer camp and then picking some blueberries off the tree. You get so spoiled that you don't want to even buy them in the grocery store because they're not like right off the tree.
Not the same.
Not the same.
So
what would you recommend to somebody visiting who's maybe never been here? You've given us a little bit of like getting out on the trails, get Serenbe, but for a visitor, what should they do?
I mean, I just would go on the foraging theme, since this will probably come out in time for people coming for May, June. The blueberries in Grange, the blackberries along the trails, but just be careful in the mushrooms. Don't eat the mushrooms unless you know what you're doing. But yes, walk the trails, go walk the labyrinth, and
up at the
just
end.
allow yourself to get Serenbe. And
what does that mean to you?
getting Serenbe means having a potential plan or just walking out your door and allowing that plan to be flexible and perhaps ending up somewhere different than when you plan to go. Mm-hmm. But allow yourself to not have so much structure around what you're going to do, and just give yourself the leeway of seeing where you're pulled. And if the wonderful community members are waving at you, they're not weird. They're just wonderful. So get to know them.
A lot of people say it reminds them of being on a college campus where spontaneity is part of life.
Yes, I describe it as we're like between a college campus and a retirement community, wrapped up in one. Mm-hmm. When I have clients that come here and then they call me and they're like, so tell me more about this place. I'm like,
it's hard to describe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Elaine, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll put all sorts of notes in the show, or all sorts of links in the show notes of how to get in touch with you. And look forward to seeing you at the Biophilic Leadership Summit.
Yes.
Too.
I love that you just naturally brought that up.
That's crazy. I really interviewed Rebecca this morning and had just an incredible time talking to her, that she created her own awareness of things that we were doing that we didn't realize that was regenerative.
Well, we have been wanting to collaborate for a long time, and we've planned, and we talk often, and so this is the first time we're going to get to present together, which we're really excited about.
To meet her in person.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for the time. This was wonderful chatting with you.